The fluorescent lights of the Magnolia Creek Estates Community Center meeting room hummed a dreary tune, casting a sickly pallor on the proceedings. The air hung thick with the ghosts of stale coffee and shattered suburban dreams. Across the cheap folding table sat the Architectural Review Committee, the arbiters of aesthetic taste in our little slice of beige paradise. Brenda, the HOA president, flanked by her loyal acolytes, Gary and Carol. Gary looked half asleep, his thoughts likely drifting towards his prize-winning inflatable flamingo, Floyd. Carol was knitting something aggressively beige. Brenda, radiating the smug authority of a minor despot, slid my solar panel application back across the table. She handled it with the kind of careful distaste usually reserved for used tissues or evidence bags. "Mark," she began, her voice smooth but carrying the undertone of a dentist about to drill without anesthetic. "The committee has diligently reviewed your application for the rooftop solar photovoltaic energy system installation." She savored the long, official name, letting it hang in the air like a bad smell. "And unfortunately, after careful consideration of the relevant bylaws and aesthetic guidelines, we have decided to deny the request at this time." "Deny it?" My jaw tightened. "Deny it? But why?" "I don't understand. It meets all the state guidelines for solar access. The panels I specified are the low-profile black-on-black kind. They're practically invisible from the street. I included the spec sheets, the renderings." Brenda offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a tight, practiced curve of the lips. "While we certainly appreciate your enthusiasm for renewable energy, Mark, the ARC feels unanimously." She glanced pointedly at Gary, who blinked awake, and Carol, who paused her knitting needle mid-click, that the proposed installation would negatively impact the aesthetic uniformity and visual harmony that are so crucial to maintaining property values within Magnolia Creek Estates. Aesthetic uniformity? Visual harmony? My internal monologue kicked into high gear, fueled by righteous indignation. "Brenda, your house is beige. My house is beige. Every single house on this godforsaken block is a slightly different HOA-approved shade of beige. We live in a symphony of taupe. What visual harmony are we possibly disrupting? The delicate balance of off-white trim and taupe siding?" "Negative impact?" I echoed, trying to keep my voice level. It wasn't easy. "Brenda, with all due respect, Gary over there," I nodded towards the now slightly more awake Gary, "has an 8-foot-tall, neon-pink inflatable flamingo named Floyd presiding over his lawn from May through September. And Carol," I glanced at the knitter, "your collection of wind chimes sounds like a pterodactyl attacking a gamelan orchestra during a hurricane. That doesn't impact neighborhood aesthetics." Gary straightened up, affronted. "Hey now," he protested mildly. "Floyd is a beloved seasonal tradition. And he's tasteful." "That's entirely different, Mark," Brenda cut in smoothly, waving away Gary's defense of his plastic poultry. "Those are approved seasonal decorations and auditory landscape enhancements." "Auditory landscape enhancement? Seriously?" "Solar panels are, well, they're permanent structures, and frankly," she lowered her voice slightly, as if sharing a distasteful secret, "they look rather industrial." "Industrial?" I sputtered. "They're sleek. They're modern. They save homeowners money on electricity. They help the environment, Brenda. Remember that Green Living newsletter the HOA sent out last Earth Day? The one printed on non-recycled paper?" Brenda's smile tightened further, approaching neutron star density. "The CC and Rs, Mark, specifically Article 4, Section 3B, grant the Architectural Review Committee broad discretion regarding any and all exterior modifications to ensure the preservation of our community's character and, most importantly, our property values. The decision," She tapped the rejected application with a perfectly manicured finger. "Is final." I stared at her, then at Gary, who was examining his cuticles, then at Carol, who had resumed her furious knitting. Final. Just like that, my modest attempt to harness the free energy pouring down on my perfectly suitable south-facing roof shot down because it didn't align with Brenda's vision of beige, flamingo-dotted, wind chime-filled suburban perfection. I grabbed the rejected application, the paper crinkling in my suddenly clenched fist. "Fine," I managed, pushing my chair back. The scrape of its legs on the linoleum sounded unnaturally loud in the small room. "Thank you for your time." I walked out of that depressing room, the fluorescent hum chasing me, my blood pressure doing the cha-cha. Back home, I slammed the useless application down on the kitchen counter, startling my cat, Schrödinger, who had been napping peacefully in a patch of sunlight-free, unapproved sunlight, streaming through the window. "Can you believe this, Schrödi?" I ranted, pacing the kitchen. The cat just blinked slowly, entirely unconcerned with the tyranny of the Magnolia Creek Estates HOA. Aesthetic uniformity, visual harmony. She called solar panels industrial, this, from a woman whose prize-winning begonias look like something out of Little Shop of Horrors. I vented to my long-suffering girlfriend, Chloe, over dinner. She listened patiently, offered sympathetic noises, and suggested maybe we could try smaller, less visible panels, or perhaps a solar garden gnome. "No," I insisted, stabbing a piece of broccoli with unnecessary force. "It's the principle of the thing. They can't just arbitrarily deny it. There are laws." And so began my descent into the rabbit hole of HOA regulations and state solar access rights. I spent hours online, fueled by coffee and spite. Turns out, our state did have laws intended to prevent HOAs from outright banning solar energy systems. But like water finding a crack, HOAs, like ours, had become masters of the loophole. Reasonable restrictions was the key phrase. And Brenda and her beige brigade had decided that panels visible from any angle, even if only by a passing satellite, constituted an unreasonable aesthetic imposition. My panels, the sleekest black-on-black models I could find, designed specifically for minimal visual impact, were deemed an affront to Magnolia Creek's delicate sensibilities. I drafted a meticulously polite, thoroughly researched appeal letter. I cited the relevant state statutes. I included satellite photos highlighting the minimal visibility. I attached testimonials from homeowners in other, apparently less aesthetically fragile, HOA communities who had similar installations. I even threw in a paragraph about reducing our collective carbon footprint, hoping to appeal to their, likely non-existent, sense of environmental responsibility. 2 weeks later, I received their response. A form letter, cold and impersonal, reiterating the RC's final decision based on the same vague, aesthetic concerns. Not even a personalized rejection, just bureaucratic boilerplate. That weekend, I was sitting in my backyard, staring morosely at my roof. The sun beat down relentlessly, mocking me with its abundance of free, unusable energy. My gaze drifted across the street to my neighbor Dave's ridiculously oversized pickup truck. Sunlight glinted fiercely off its chrome bumper, sending a dazzling beam right back at me. Annoying. Then, my eyes caught another flash. A kid down the street had left one of those cheap plastic toy mirrors lying on their lawn, and it too was bouncing a concentrated spot of sunlight onto the sidewalk. Glint, reflection, concentration, an idea sparked. A crazy, beautiful, possibly illegal idea. They don't want panels on the roof? My mind raced. Okay, fine. But the CC and Rs, do they say anything about reflecting sunlight? What if I didn't collect the sun on the roof, but just redirected it? From my own yard? Onto the roof, or maybe onto something else? A solar collector? A water heater pipe? A giant passive-aggressive heat ray aimed squarely at Brenda's prize-winning begonias? My fingers flew across my laptop keyboard, pulling up the searchable PDF of the Magnolia Creek Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions. A document thicker than my college physics textbook and twice as dense. Control plus F. Mirror. 0 results. Reflection. 0 results. Reflective surface. 0 results. Solar concentration. 0 results. Heat ray. Surprisingly, also 0 results. There were pages upon pages about approved fence heights, mailbox designs, lawn maintenance schedules, the maximum allowable number of non-native shrub species, and, of course, the infamous aesthetic uniformity. There were clauses about structures, landscaping features, and the catch-all nuisances, but nothing specifically forbidding the strategic placement of mirrors on one's own property for the purpose of redirecting sunlight. A slow, maniacal grin spread across my face. Schrödinger, watching me from the patio door, tilted his head as if sensing a disturbance in the suburban force. "If I can't collect the sun directly, Schrödi," I whispered, leaning towards the cat conspiratorially, "then I'll import it, via reflection. What are they going to do? Regulate the angle of incidence? Fine me for improper photon management?" The sheer, unadulterated, loophole-exploiting absurdity of it was intoxicating. Forget solar panels. Operation Blinding Light was a go. Phase 1 required a proof of concept. I drove to the nearest big-box hardware store, feeling like a suburban MacGyver embarking on a secret mission. I bypassed the sensible aisles, plumbing, electrical, lawn care, and headed straight for the decorative section. I emerged 20 minutes later with 3 large, cheap acrylic mirrors, the kind usually destined for dorm rooms or questionable home gym setups, tucked under my arm. Back in the relative privacy of my backyard, privacy being a loose term in Magnolia Creek, where Brenda seemed to possess telescopic vision, I began my experiments. I propped the mirrors up against lawn chairs, patio furniture, even Schrödinger's scratching post. He was not amused. Using clamps and bungee cords, I started angling them, trying to get the reflected sunlight to converge on a single, dark patch of shingles on my south-facing roof, roughly where the offending solar panels would have sat. Okay, I muttered to myself, squinting against the glare. Angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. Got to account for the Earth's rotation, the sun's apparent movement. This is basically high school physics, but with significantly more potential for accidentally setting the neighbor's prize-winning petunias on fire. I taped a cheap outdoor thermometer to the target shingle patch. Within minutes, the temperature reading started climbing. 10 degrees, 15, 20 degrees above the ambient roof temperature. It worked! My moment of scientific triumph was interrupted by a voice from over the fence. "Hey, Mark, what you building there? Some kind of modern art installation?" It was my immediate neighbor, Doug. Doug was generally a chill guy, mostly concerned with grilling, fantasy football, and keeping his lawn adequately, but not obsessively, green. He peered over the fence, eyeing my haphazard collection of mirrors with curiosity. "Hey, Doug," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Just doing a little, passive solar experimentation. You know, maximizing my property's thermal gain potential while remaining fully compliant with all HOA architectural guidelines." Doug squinted at the setup. "Looks more like you're trying to signal aircraft, buddy. Or maybe ward off vampires. Or just intensely warm up a very specific patch of asphalt," I said with a shrug. "You know, for science, and maybe slightly out of spite." Doug chuckled. "Ah, the HOA denied the panels, huh? Brenda on the warpath again?" "You have no idea," I sighed. "She called them industrial." "Ouch!" Doug winced sympathetically. Well, good luck with the, light sculptures. He retreated back to his own yard, probably to fire up his grill, leaving me to my reflective machinations. The proof of concept was successful, but the cheap acrylic mirrors weren't going to cut it. They warped slightly in the heat, and the reflection wasn't as crisp as I needed. Plus, propping them up with lawn chairs wasn't exactly a long-term, structurally sound solution. I needed something bigger, better, more permanent. I needed professional help. Finding a contractor willing to build a custom multi-mirror solar concentration array for the express purpose of circumventing HOA rules proved challenging. My first call was to a local handyman service highly recommended on the neighborhood Facebook group, a digital space Brenda patrolled with iron-fisted moderation. Yeah, Pete's Pro Handyman Services, Pete speaking. The voice sounded friendly, but slightly harried. Hi, Pete, I began. I have a slightly unusual project. I need a quote to install several large, precisely angled mirrors in my backyard, mounted on freestanding posts, sunk in concrete. A pause. Mirrors? Like for looking at yourself, big ones? No, I clarified quickly. Not vanity mirrors, reflective surfaces, for reflecting sunlight, onto my roof for achieving significant thermal gain. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear Pete scratching his head through the phone. You want me to install giant mirrors? To heat your roof? Son, wouldn't that, melt your shingles? Or maybe void your homeowner's insurance? It's a controlled experiment, I insisted, perhaps a little too enthusiastically. Very scientific, low-angle concentration. Can you just handle the structural part? Mounting some sturdy posts and attaching large reflective panels at very specific angles? Pete chuckled nervously. Buddy, I fix leaky faucets, hang drywall, patch woodpecker holes. Setting up giant potential death rays is kinda outside my usual wheelhouse. You might need, I don't know, maybe call NASA? Or maybe just get some attic insulation? He politely declined the job, clearly convinced I was either dangerously eccentric or building a supervillain lair. Several similar calls followed. Most contractors hung up after the words, reflect sunlight onto roof. One guy suggested I just paint my roof white. Another asked if I was trying to communicate with aliens. I was starting to despair. Was my dream of reflective revenge destined to remain just a dream? Then, I found Sal's Custom Metal and Fab. Their website was basic, mostly showcasing wrought iron gates, custom truck racks, and the occasional weird metal sculpture. No mention of heliostats or HOA spite projects, but they did custom fabrication, and that's what I needed. I dialed the number, bracing for another rejection. A gruff voice answered after 2 rings. Sal's. Hi, I said. My name's Mark. I have a custom fabrication and installation project I was hoping to discuss. Shoot, Sal said curtly. I took a deep breath and laid it out. The need for 6 large panels, maybe 4 by 8 feet. Highly reflective surface polished aluminum. Mirror-coated substrate. Mounted on heavy-duty adjustable steel posts, sunk deep in concrete footings. Angled just so, according to calculations I'd painstakingly made, to bounce sunlight from my backyard onto a specific section of my south-facing roof. Sal was silent for a long moment after I finished. I held my breath. So, let me get this straight, he finally said, his voice slow and deliberate. You want 6 big-ass shiny panels, on posts, in your yard, pointed like goddamn laser cannons at your own house. Essentially, yes, I admitted. But for passive thermal gain, not offensive capabilities. Probably. Sal grunted. Polished aluminum's cheaper, but harder to keep clean, lower reflectivity. Glass mirror bonded to a rigid substrate is better, More expensive, heavier. Posts gotta be beefy to handle wind load, especially angled like that. Need concrete footings at least 4 feet deep. He was thinking technically, not judgmentally. This was progress. Exactly, I said, relieved. Whatever you think is best structurally. Can you do it? Sal stroked his beard, a sound that crackled over the phone. Can I fabricate it? Sure. Ain't the weirdest thing I've built. Had a guy last year wanted a life-sized chrome giraffe for his garden. Why you want to cook your own roof is your business, kid. Long as the check clears and it ain't strictly illegal. It's perfectly legal. I jumped in, maybe a little too quickly. Checked the CC&Rs myself. No rules against mirrors or reflective surfaces used for landscaping. Sal chuckled, a low rumble. HOA, huh? He said, a note of understanding entering his voice. Say no more. Run into those types before. Had one try to tell me my welding sparks were disrupting the neighborhood's energy field. He sighed. All right, kid. Let's talk materials, angles, and how much this glorious monument to spite is going to cost you. Sal wasn't cheap, but he was competent, unfazed, and, I sensed, slightly amused by the whole endeavor. He understood the mission. We were go for installation. Installation day dawned bright and sunny, perfect conditions for Operation Blinding Light. Sal and his two-man crew arrived early in a battered flatbed truck, loaded with gleaming metal posts and carefully wrapped reflective panels. The sound of the post hole digger biting into my meticulously manicured lawn was music to my ears. It was the sound of progress. It was the sound of Brenda's impending aneurysm. Predictably, she materialized within minutes, drawn by the sound of unapproved activity like a moth to a flame, or perhaps, more accurately, like a vulture to potential carrion. She marched across her lawn and onto mine, a clear violation of property lines, I noted mentally. Clipboard already in hand, her face set in grim determination. Mark, she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. What is the meaning of this? What are these structures you are erecting? I ambled over, adopting my most innocent, helpful expression. Morning, Brenda. Beautiful day, isn't it? Just installing some decorative landscape features. You know, enhancing the visual appeal of the property. Adding a little artistic flair. Brenda eyed the thick steel posts being wrestled into place by Sal's crew. Decorative? She scoffed. They look like radar dishes or missile launchers. Are these antennas? Satellite dishes? They're not on the approved list. Heavens no, Brenda, I said, widening my eyes in mock surprise. Not antennas at all. These are kinetic light sculptures. Very avant-garde. The reflective elements are designed to capture the dynamic beauty of the sun's rays and create shifting patterns throughout the day. Sal, wiping sweat from his brow, chimed in helpfully. Yeah, lady. Sculptures. Heavy ones. Real modern art. He winked at me. Brenda's eyes narrowed into suspicious slits. I have reviewed the architectural guidelines extensively, Mark. I don't recall any provisions for kinetic light sculptures, especially ones requiring industrial-grade footings. I am issuing an immediate stop work order pending a full review by the Architectural Review Committee. She held up her clipboard like a scepter. I held up my own printout of the CC&Rs, conveniently highlighted. Actually, Brenda, Article 6, Section 5 permits landscaping features, including gardens, fountains, and statuary or other garden art, provided they meet setback requirements and don't exceed 6 feet in height, which these posts won't once the panels are mounted. And, as we've established, there's no specific prohibition on reflective surfaces being used in said garden art. I smiled sweetly. Sal and his team are just finishing the installation of the bases today, perfectly within the rules. Brenda sputtered. She knew I had her, at least for now, trapped in the gray areas of her own beloved rule book. She took several pictures with her phone, muttering threats about fines, liens, and violations of the nebulous community character. But she couldn't legally stop Sal from sinking posts into my property. She retreated, defeated for the moment, but clearly already plotting her counter-offensive, leaving Sal and his crew to finish their work under a cloud of impotent rage. By late afternoon, it was done. 6 gleaming 4-by-8-foot panels, mirror-bright, stood mounted on sturdy, adjustable steel posts in my backyard. Angled towards the heavens like offerings to some vengeful sun god, they looked spectacular and slightly terrifying. The next morning, the real fun began. Armed with Sal's instructions, a wrench, and my trusty angle finder app, I started calibrating. Slowly, carefully, I adjusted the tilt and rotation of each mirror, aiming the reflected beams towards the target zone on my roof. The effect was immediate and dramatic. 6 overlapping squares of intensely bright light converged, creating a shimmering, almost blinding patch on the dark shingles. My thermometer, still taped in place, shot up 30 degrees in minutes. Success? Maybe. Too much success? In my enthusiasm, I might have slightly overshot the adjustment on mirror hash 3. For a fleeting moment, a searing beam of concentrated sunlight swept across the fence line and landed squarely on Brenda's prized, meticulously cultivated begonias. I could almost hear them sizzling. Oops, I quickly readjusted. Calibration error, I told myself. Purely accidental. My phone rang less than 5 minutes later. It was Carol from down the street, she of the cacophonous wind chimes. "Mark? Honey? It's Carol." Her voice sounded strained. Listen, is everything all right over there? There's a beam of light coming from your yard that just shot through my kitchen window, nearly blinded me. It was like staring directly into the sun. The cat's hiding under the sofa and won't come out. "Oh gosh, Carol, so sorry about that," I exclaimed, injecting maximum contrition into my voice. "Just calibrating my new, solar alignment system. Very sensitive equipment. Minor adjustments still needed." "Won't happen again? Hope the cat's okay." I frantically tweaked mirror hash 5, shifting its beam slightly skyward. The official response from the HOA arrived 2 days later via certified mail. A thick envelope containing a multi-page letter dripping with legalese. It cited violations of nuisance clauses. Article 9. No noxious or offensive activity shall be carried on, nor shall anything be done thereon which may be or may become an annoyance or nuisance to the neighborhood. It claimed the mirrors constituted unapproved structures, despite my kinetic sculpture argument. It demanded immediate removal of the reflective array. They'd given it a name, and threatened daily fines starting at $100 if I failed to comply within 7 days. I spent an evening drafting my response, citing the specific lack of rules regarding mirrors, reiterating the garden art defense, and politely suggesting that any perceived nuisance was subjective and likely exaggerated. I sent it back via certified mail, feeling a thrill of defiance. Let the games continue. Brenda, however, wasn't content with just letters and fines. A few days later, as I was performing my morning mirror adjustment ritual, the sun's path changes, after all, a police cruiser pulled up quietly in front of my house. 2 officers got out, looking decidedly unenthusiastic about dealing with suburban squabbles. "Morning, sir." Officer Miller. I recognized him from the turntable incident at Dave's house across town, small world. Said, adjusting his belt. "We received a call about, excessive light reflection originating from your property. Something about a blinding glare." I gestured towards my gleaming creations. "Morning, officers. Just doing a little passive solar heating experiment. Using mirrors to redirect sunlight onto my roof. Perfectly legal on my own property. Just trying to save a little on the energy bill." Right on cue, Brenda appeared on her front lawn, practically vibrating with indignation. "It's a menace, officer," she declared, marching towards us. "It's blinding. People can't even sit on their patios. It's a fire hazard. He's trying to weaponize sunlight against the community." "I am most certainly not," I protested. "The primary focus is entirely on my own roof. And maybe, possibly, Brenda's begonias suffered some minor, purely accidental calibration-related photothermal stress earlier in the week, but that's been corrected." Officer Davies sighed, looking from my mirrors to my roof, then over at Brenda's slightly singed-looking flower bed. "Okay. So you've got some big mirrors pointing at your house. Is it actually damaging anything or hurting anyone right now?" "It's hurting my eyes," Brenda insisted, "and my begonias, and my property values, and the aesthetic harmony." Officer Miller held up a hand. "Sir," he said to me, his voice firm but weary, "just try to aim them carefully so they don't create a safety hazard or a direct nuisance for your neighbors, okay? This really seems like more of an HOA civil dispute than a police matter at this point." To Brenda, "Ma'am, unless there's an immediate danger or illegal activity, this is something you need to handle through your association's rules." They got back in their cruiser and drove off, leaving Brenda fuming on the sidewalk and me feeling vindicated, if slightly unnerved. Weaponizing sunlight? Even I hadn't thought of phrasing it quite like that. The HOA, predictably, doubled down. The fines started appearing in my mailbox, along with increasingly threatening letters from their lawyer mentioning injunctions, lawsuits, and forced removal at my expense. They were trying to bully me into submission. Big mistake. Corner a reasonably intelligent guy with a basic understanding of physics and a grudge against petty bureaucracy, and you don't get submission. You get escalation. If 6 mirrors were good, surely more mirrors would be better. And maybe smarter? The daily manual adjustments were getting tedious. What if the mirrors could track the sun automatically? This required expertise beyond Sal's metal fabrication skills. I reached out to a guy I knew from a local makerspace, an electronics whiz named Kevin who built robots for fun. I pitched him the idea over beers. "So," I explained, sketching on a napkin, "I've got these 6 large mirrors on adjustable mounts. I need a way to make them track the sun automatically throughout the day. Simple servo motors, maybe. Light-dependent resistors? An Arduino controller?" Kevin's eyes lit up behind his thick-rimmed glasses. "Dude, you've built a rudimentary heliostat array? Awesome! That's so cool! What's the target? Are you focusing it for a solar furnace? Powering a Stirling engine? Trying to contact aliens?" Mostly just my roof shingles," I admitted. "And maybe Brenda's bird bath occasionally. Just kidding. Mostly kidding. It's kind of an HOA dispute thing." Kevin grinned. "Righteous. HOA giving you grief over solar panels?" "You have no idea," I sighed. "Say no more," Kevin said, already pulling out his phone to look up motor specs. "Suburban problems require geeky solutions. We can totally rig up a simple tracker system. Couple of photoresistors for directional sensing, an Arduino Nano to run the logic, some weatherproof servos. Yeah, we can make those mirrors dance." A week later, after several evenings spent tinkering in my garage amidst soldering fumes and lines of code, Project Blinding Light got an upgrade. Each mirror was now equipped with a small motor and a sensor array. As the sun moved across the sky, the mirrors would slowly, almost imperceptibly, adjust their angles, keeping the beams tightly focused on the target zone. It was beautiful. It was elegant. It was deeply, satisfyingly nerdy, and, I hoped, infinitely more annoying to Brenda. The automated tracking system did not go unnoticed. Brenda called an emergency HOA meeting, the sole agenda item listed ominously as "Discussion and Action Regarding Unapproved Automated High-Intensity Reflective Devices at Lot 42, Henderson property. Attendance was higher than usual. The air crackled with suburban tension. Brenda stood at the podium armed with photos, bylaws, and righteous fury. "And now," she declared, her voice quivering, "these contraptions move on their own. They follow the sun like metallic sunflowers of doom. This is a clear violation of Section 7, subsection B, regarding structures not in keeping with community aesthetic standards, and Article 9 regarding nuisances." I stood up, clutching my own annotated copy of the CC and Rs. "Brenda, respectfully, the community aesthetic standard appears to be varying shades of beige. My kinetic light sculptures are highly reflective. They reflect the beige. They reflect the blue sky. They reflect Gary's flamingo. They are dynamic. How is that not in keeping with aesthetics? And as for nuisance, the light is directed at my roof, not public areas." Gary chimed in, looking genuinely distressed. "My Floyd feels threatened. The constant glinting, it unnerves him. He's losing his vibrant pink." "Floyd is an inflatable plastic flamingo, Gary," I countered, trying not to laugh. "He doesn't have feelings, and he's probably fading because he's been sitting in the sun for 3 months. The meeting devolved from there. Accusations flew. Someone mentioned property values again. Someone else worried about blinding pilots. We weren't that close to the airport. Then Brenda played her trump card. She patched in the HOA's lawyer via speakerphone. A disembodied voice, smooth and menacing, filled the room, talking about preliminary injunctions, tortious interference with quiet enjoyment, summary judgments, and the potential for liens exceeding the value of my house. It was impressive. It was intimidating. It almost made me waver. Almost. But the lawyer, for all his bluster, couldn't point to a single line in the CC and Rs that specifically forbade what I was doing. It was all interpretation, all subjective clauses about aesthetics and nuisances. My loophole held firm. I reiterated my position calmly, refused to dismantle the array, and dared them to take me to court over reflective garden art. The meeting ended in an angry stalemate. Brenda, however, wasn't done escalating. A few days later, while I was at work, a fire engine pulled up in front of my house. Apparently someone, I wonder who, had called 911 reporting a suspicious device emitting concentrated heat beams and expressing concern about an imminent fire hazard. My poor girlfriend Chloe had to deal with them. When I got home, she recounted the story, alternating between amusement and annoyance. A fire captain, looking very serious, had inspected the mirror array, asked pointed questions about its purpose and safety features, and measured the temperature on the roof shingles directly under the beam. "I told him it was your passive solar water heating pre-stage," Chloe said, rolling her eyes. "I pointed to the pipes near the roof vents and said you were planning to install collectors soon. I think I mentioned something about temperature sensors and automated safety defocusing sequences." "Did I install those?" I asked. "Not yet," she admitted. "But I sounded convincing. He seemed skeptical but couldn't find anything actually on fire, so he just gave me a stern lecture about fire safety, left a bunch of pamphlets on preventing spontaneous combustion, and told us to be careful not to, and I quote, accidentally ignite the neighborhood. So now the fire department thought I was a potential suburban arsonist. Fantastic. But crucially, they hadn't forced me to dismantle anything. Score another point for Team Mark. The climax arrived, as these things often do in suburbia, during the annual Magnolia Creek Estates HOA summer picnic. It was held, as always, in the small, meticulously manicured community park that bordered my backyard. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal, sunscreen, and simmering resentment, mostly emanating from Brenda's direction. My automated mirrors, oblivious to the festivities, were dutifully tracking the afternoon sun, bathing my roof shingles in glorious, energy-saving photons. I was trying to enjoy a slightly too mayonnaise-y potato salad, keeping a wary eye on Brenda, who was circulating among the residents, likely spreading tales of my solar villainy. Then, it happened. Maybe it was a particularly strong gust of wind hitting mirror hash 4 just right. Maybe Kevin's tracking algorithm had a minor bug related to daylight saving time. Maybe the universe just has a wicked sense of humor. Whatever the cause, the tightly focused beams seemed to widen slightly and drift. A secondary reflection, or perhaps the edge of the main beam, swept off my roof and directly across the adjacent park picnic area. Chaos erupted. There were yelps. A sudden, intense glare flashed across faces. Someone dropped a tray of watermelon slices. Gary yelped as Floyd the flamingo, who was naturally attending the picnic, seemed to visibly shrink and curl under the unexpected heat. Brenda, who was in mid-sentence condemning my reflective menace, let out a shriek as a beam momentarily turned her plastic cup of lemonade into a lens, focusing a pinpoint of light onto a nearby paper napkin, which promptly smoldered and caught fire for a dramatic half-second before someone stomped it out. "My napkin!" someone yelled. "Floyd!" cried Gary. "He's trying to incinerate us!" shrieked Brenda, pointing a trembling, jello-stained finger directly at me. She looked ready to lead a torch and pitchfork mob straight to my backyard. This was it, the final straw. Surely the police, the fire department, maybe even the National Guard would be called now. I braced myself, but then, the twist. The beam, continuing its slow, almost imperceptible sweep, moved off the smoldering napkin remains and landed squarely on the communal barbecue grill where Doug was struggling to get the charcoal lit. The damp briquettes hissed and smoked sullenly. The concentrated sunlight hit them. Within seconds, the smoke thickened, turned white, and then whoosh! The entire grill erupted in perfect, even flames. "Whoa!" Doug exclaimed, jumping back. "Hey, thanks, Mark! Perfect timing! Burgers are going to be ready in record time!" He gave me a thumbs up. Before Brenda could recover from this unexpected turn of events, the beam drifted again, slightly lower this time, sweeping across the sad little community flower bed near the park entrance. The very flower bed Brenda was constantly complaining looked wilted and lackluster. The intense light bathed the drooping petunias and thirsty marigolds. Carol, she of the wind chimes and the traumatized cat, gasped. "Look!" she cried, pointing. "Brenda, look! The flowers! They're perking up. It's like they're drinking the light." Okay, maybe that was an exaggeration, but the intense light did seem to make the colors look more vibrant, and one particularly droopy sunflower seemed to straighten up slightly, as if reaching for the unexpected solar boost. The final stop on the beam's accidental tour of the park was the row of solar-powered landscape lights lining the walkway. The very lights the HOA had approved and installed last year as part of their paper-thin commitment to green initiatives. The beam hit the small photovoltaic cells. Instantly, the lights flickered on, shining with surprising brightness in the middle of the sunny afternoon. The crowd murmured. People looked from the perfectly lit grill to the seemingly revitalized flowers, to the brightly shining solar lights, then back to my house and the gleaming mirrors. The anger and panic seemed to dissipate, replaced by a bewildered amusement. Brenda stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish, jello slowly dripping from her finger. Her weapon of mass destruction had just efficiently cooked lunch, possibly saved her flower bed, and ironically supercharged the HOA's own approved solar devices. How could she possibly call the cops now? "Officer, arrest that man. His illegal heat ray is making our park better." She couldn't. The great glare-off ended not with sirens and handcuffs, but with cognitive dissonance and well-cooked hamburgers. She shot me a look that could peel paint, then turned and stormed away from the picnic, defeated by the sheer, unpredictable absurdity of applied physics. In the aftermath, things shifted. The HOA, realizing they couldn't easily legislate against reflected sunlight without looking ridiculous, especially after the picnic incident, seemed to back off. The threatening letters stopped. The fines mysteriously disappeared from my account. Brenda avoided eye contact. They did, however, quietly convene an emergency session and pass a hastily written amendment to the CC&Rs. It didn't mention mirrors specifically, but it broadly banned any external device or structure primarily designed to concentrate or redirect electromagnetic radiation, including solar energy, onto any property, structure, or common area within Magnolia Creek Estates, unless expressly approved in writing by the Architectural Review Committee. My loophole was officially closed. But you know what? I didn't even care. I'd made my point. I'd fought the beige bureaucracy, and in my own weird way, I'd won. The mirrors had served their purpose. Sal came back a few weeks later to dismantle the array. "Shame," he said, loading the last panel onto his truck. "It was a work of art, kid. A real monument." "It really was, Sal," I agreed. A month after the mirrors came down, I submitted a new application to the ARC. This time, for a slightly smaller, even more discreet solar panel system, positioned on a section of the roof completely invisible from the street and shielded from Brenda's line of sight by a strategically planted and HOA-approved maple tree. I included detailed diagrams, photoshopped renderings showing zero visibility, and a polite cover letter. To my utter astonishment, it was approved. No fanfare, no arguments. Just a quiet, rubber-stamped approval form in my mailbox. Maybe they were just exhausted. Maybe they were scared I'd move on to wind turbines or geothermal drilling. Maybe Brenda finally realized that actual solar panels looked a hell of a lot less industrial than 6 giant sun-tracking mirrors. So now I have solar panels. Quietly, efficiently, boringly generating electricity on my roof. My power bill has plummeted. Life in Magnolia Creek Estates has returned to its usual state of placid beige tranquility. Sometimes, though, when the sun hits just right, I catch a glimpse of Brenda across the street, tending her fully recovered begonias. And I swear, I can almost see her squinting nervously at the sky, perhaps wondering if I still have a mirror or two hidden away somewhere, just waiting for the right moment to unleash a little reflective chaos. And maybe, just maybe, I do. You know, for science.